Ethan, Ryan, can you both hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. How are you today?
I'm doing
Good. How are you guys?
Doing pretty well. I'm so grateful that you're able to join us today. It's a historic day for the UPUA.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to first acknowledge that we have a pretty small cohort today. This is our first press conference, so it'll just be really the two of you today. But as we move on, we'd like to bring in more student reporters, student journalists, especially those who are taking classes, which might require something like this. But please don't feel as though, well, you should feel as though we like you very much, enough to consider you our first invitees, but you'll certainly not be our only ones in the future. Okay, so let's begin, if that's all right with everyone. I first want to thank, again, each of you for being here today. This is our very first press conference of the UPUA, specifically on behalf of the McKay Pathical Administration. This is something that Lexi and I held very near and dear to our hearts, running on a student government platform that was focused on many things, but deeply within my heart, transparency, honesty, and accessibility. In my opinion, there's no greater way for student government to be transparent than to interact with the press, which under our country's freedom of the press and laws and statutes which designate that, enable you to share everything that we're up to with the student body. More importantly, I want to really take the opportunity to answer any questions that you have about the UPUA, especially its recent happenings and everything going on, that I can help clarify, just as I might at a General Assembly meeting in which representatives can respond, but it's not always the case that journalists can. As Emily mentioned, I'd like to just remind everybody that the Zoom etiquette is pretty low key. If you want, you can feel free to change your name to include your outlet, but I would ask that you do change it at least to include your pronouns. I know where both of you come from, so I'm not too worried about that, but thank you very much for helping there. I'd also like to remind you, if you have any questions, to go ahead and use the hand raise feature. Generally, what I'll do is move from a report of sorts and then move on to any questions that you have for a Q&A period. Sound like a plan?
Yes.
Awesome. I love the participation. Thank you. This is the best that we can do, not being in person. So thank you again for bearing with that, or with us there. I also want to first introduce and recognize Emily Zimbler, who's joining us. Emily serves as our press secretary and has been really, really helpful in setting up our very first press conference. Terrific job all around. She's helped me put together really everything, and I can't say it any more clearly that it wouldn't have been possible without her. So serious round of applause for Emily. Emily, would you like to say any few words?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for that. That was really neat, or really sweet. Oh my God. But thank you guys for being here and being so responsive to my emails. I understand that this is a super busy time for everyone, and thank you for being able to get in contact with us and coming today. But yeah, and also if you have any more questions or concerns after this press conference, always feel free to email me. I want to help you in any way I can. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. It's a real pleasure to have you on our team. Well, let's jump right into it. Emily had sent out a press briefing with just a few updates on things that we can talk about, and obviously which I'd welcome any questions about, but I'm an open book, so feel free to go far beyond that. This week, I am incredibly pleased to announce 2 executive orders, which we'll be signing, one delegated to the Finance Department and the other to the Department of Health and Wellness. The first focuses on the financial transparency of the UPUA. It's near and dear to my heart that, for example, an organization that has over $100,000 budget makes very clear that exactly what they're spending that money on. And obviously this comes through with bills and things like that. But it's hard to keep track of all of those expenditures, and it's hard to do so in a very manageable and understandable way. Currently, the UPUA's budget, at least in older format, can be found online, but many students have reached out and said that it's relatively unclear how it works and might even cause more confusion than not. So the executive order, which I plan to sign today, will essentially reformat the budget to be more understandable and more accessible to the student body, as well as permanently locate it on the website so that it continuously updates with all of our expenditures, both legislative through bills, as well as any sort of discretionary spent by the executive or legislative. The second deals with the Green Bandana project. And I have to admit that we're still working on that. The Department of Health and Wellness is a brand new department in the UPUA, and I'm very, very excited to have it. The Green Bandana project itself focuses on creating an environment of support for students, in which essentially students can receive a green bandana, receive resources provided by the UPUA's Department of Health and Wellness, and then essentially act as a fountain of resources for students who might need a pick-me-up or even a direction to one of the many offices that Penn State has, such as CAPS and the like. That is, like I said, still a work in progress, but I hope to sign it sometime later this week. I can't lie and say that exams haven't gotten the best of me in some ways. Poli-Sci 471 is quite the handful, but it's fun, I will say that. Some other brief updates. Let's see. Many of you probably noticed that on Friday, the Board of Trustees held a meeting in which President Barron announced his retirement in 2022. I just first want to offer my sincere appreciation for all that President Barron has done over the last 8 years here at Penn State. He really has helped the university grow in tremendous ways. And although we might not have always agreed on things, we've certainly found a way to lead Penn State forward in a way which emphasizes collaboration, which emphasizes community, and which emphasizes a better Penn State for all. So I do want to thank him there. I also want to encourage the Board of Trustees in their deliberations and finding a future president, as is their job. They essentially serve as the hiring body that finds our next president, to continue looking for bold and courageous leaders who are not afraid to challenge the status quo, who are not afraid to take the lead in terms of our Big Ten partners, and especially in the realms related to climate action and in racial justice on our campuses. This Friday served as my personal last Board of Trustees meeting. Some of you might know that the UPUA president and vice president each serve as non-voting members on the board, along with the student trustee. The student trustee, of course, does serve as a voting member, but this was Lexi and I's last. The board typically allows the UPUA, all of the student government presidents, a few brief moments to share some final remarks. That wasn't the case this time around, and I attribute that pretty much to the virtual environment. But I do plan to send some written remarks just thanking the board for all of their partnership and openness in working with us, as well as, and very importantly, encouraging the board to consider, continue finding ways to really bring about a more just and equitable future for Penn Staters, especially through the realm of climate action. As you know, back in the fall, on the International Day of Climate Action, I released an address calling on Penn State University and all of its facets to take greater action against the continuing disparities and challenges that climate change proposes, and which ultimately are going to be borne by ourselves and our futures and our children and their children's and our children's children. And I really do want to encourage that the board not only move forward with this with this push, but that our next UPUA president and vice president does the exact same thing too. I encourage you, the press, to hold them accountable to those commitments. You know, Zach McKay serving in this role, I'm one entity that that ultimately serves in the office of the UPUA president, of the undergraduate student body president to be specific, but that our student government took the bold steps necessary to speak on behalf of the student body is one that ought to be noted and ought to be continued from year to year as well. That'll hopefully long outlive me in terms of student government participation. Hopefully, not necessarily life. That would not be very good. I also want to briefly update everybody following our statement on the increased Zoom bombings, which have been occurring at Penn State. Lexi and I, you may have seen, put out a statement calling on Penn State to better protect its students and make transparent how we inform our students about the various attacks which we've been seeing on campus, just the same as you would any other on-campus threat or emergency. To my knowledge, they are finding a way in which students can be notified in a more clear manner. But all in all, I'm fairly unimpressed with the slowness in which that is taken, as many students do feel as though they need to be notified directly by the administration rather than the students who are in their classes or the students who end up covering these events. I personally learned about the event through, I believe it was an Onward State article. Kudos to each of you for covering it, but again, I think it's important that our administration lets students know too. As well as that statement, we also talked about ways in which students can take better actions to secure their meetings, but at the end of the day, the onus can't fall solely on students. It can't fall in a way which puts all of the responsibility off of the administration from creating an environment that really can't be tampered with or made less secure to begin with. I think that's really the crux of the argument, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. On Sunday, I signed three pieces of legislation which were brought from the Assembly. There was Bill 1715, which was called the Financial Support for Name Change Vouchers. This essentially funds a total of 20 name change vouchers for students who would like to legally change their name. And it also commits the UPUA to advocating on behalf of the transgender community at Penn State, a community which unfortunately the student government has often left behind, but which I've been incredibly pleased to see the Assembly taking a firm stance in support of this year. I've also signed Bill 1815, which essentially funds nurturing communities of care. This is an event which the Council of Sustainable Leaders, the Student Farm, and the UPUA's Department of Sustainability are putting together, in which a collection of packets will be given out to students who'd like to come together and create their own microgreen kits. All in all, it looks like an absolutely incredibly fun time, and I look forward to partaking myself in building one. Maybe I'll keep it in the office, maybe I'll take it back home. The opportunities are endless. And I hope that each of you will find a chance to stop by the office and pick one up. You know, come to think of it, I think we might actually distribute them outside depending on the weather. So wherever it is, I hope you come and get your own kit. And then lastly, I signed Resolution 4915, which supports student disability resources and commits the UPUA to further advocacy for students with disabilities. The resolution primarily serves as an indication that the student body recognizes and appreciates the work of the Student Disability Resources Office, which is an office in the university, which is often also kept out of the limelight, or whose work, I should rather say, is not always at the forefront of students' minds. So the UPUA intends to work on various graphics to submit to social media and hopefully boost through our own channels to really ensure that students know all that the office is doing, as well as continue to promote resources which support students with disabilities and advocate on their behalf. And lastly, some administrative updates. My time is coming to an end. That's right. I very much so look forward to the upcoming election season. Students have if they intend to run for a representative or a president role. Yes, this role, they have essentially one more week to attend an information session put on by the Elections Commission. And I would encourage that they do so. The more participation that we have in our elections, the more representative that our student government can become. And unfortunately, it really has not been very representative over the years. It's been really slow to take substantial changes, and it's been very, 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 very tightly knitted to the status quo. And so I'm very much so hoping that there's a significant turnout this year in both candidates and in voters themselves. I look forward to a very peaceful transition of power and demonstrating to the federal government how that works. As I come to learn, can be difficult for some, but as always, this administration will ensure that the next is set up for success, whoever might be at the helm. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions about any of the things that I talked about, or like I mentioned, anything else which might be on your minds that I could provide a comment or answer on. Ryan?
Thanks, Zach. Zach, I'm wondering if you could touch on how you've seen financial transparency better itself in your time as UPUA as a whole, from when you started to now.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. The first piece would be just a few days after we were elected, Lexi and I were elected, we decided to go into the website and manually input the embed code for the budget sheet. Now, I'm no computer scientist, so it was a difficult task to say the least. We didn't have a staff to do it or anything like that, but we thought it was important to get the budget, which we have on a spreadsheet, up on the website as is. It's admittedly taken a bit longer to find a more succinct way to make it understandable to the students who might not understand all of the nuances of different types of accounts, the type 40, for example, being student fee dollars and 30 being alumni dollars, as well as how the UPUA show cause budget is run. But having presented to the student fee board about the budget, I feel very confident that in collaboration with our new executive director of finance, I suppose I shouldn't say new anymore, but Tony McFarland, she and I will piece together something that should be very, very accessible and understandable. And that's something that will continue from year to year. I can't imagine that anybody would want to run on taking that down from the website. I can't imagine that anybody would suggest that it shouldn't be there. It's a common step that a lot of students talk to us about on the campaign trail that I'm happy to see brought to fruition this year. Ethan?
Thank you, President McKay. I just have a quick question about the Green Bandana project. I was just wondering if you could give any further details into what the nature of the support for the students would be, any like finer details or just a general idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I don't want to get too much into the meat and potatoes because I don't want to misspeak or perhaps even misrepresent what the project intends to do. As I said, the executive order is still really a work in progress, but to my understanding, it is a program which has been championed by many schools across the Association of Big Ten Students, which essentially provides students with all types of resources. We try not to delve too much into mental health, and the reason there is because we want to ensure that students aren't signing up, and I should say severe mental health concerns, because we want to ensure that students don't feel as though they're signing up to become therapists or anything like that. That's not the case. And the UPUA cannot take on the responsibility, nor can any student government, of providing the resources CAPS does. But primarily, it will be directing students to the resources available at Penn State and making sure that they're accessible in a way that students might not always find to be so.
All right. Thank you, President McKay.
Thank you. And Zach is fine too. Ryan?
I'm wondering next if you could touch on a little bit about the upcoming town hall that UPUA will be hosting.
I'd be happy to. So again, this is something that Lexi and I felt was important to continue our commitment to interacting with students. Throughout the campaign trail, we had connected with students over coffee chats, which were plenty of fun. And to be honest with you, I think you might still find us with a cup of coffee on Thursday. The idea is to really, again, open the books, bring students in and have them interact with their student government, ask any questions that they might like. I don't think we will necessarily have as many updates as we might give at a General Assembly meeting or even at this conference, but will instead be a time to ask us anything. I imagine that there'll be probably a few topics which will be, of interest to students specifically. How are we fighting, or how are we supporting students during COVID-19? Might be one that I think we'll see given its continued relevance in today's culture, in today's life and world, I should say. But also, as I know many groups are highlighting climate action this week, how the UPUA intends to continue those things too. And we intend to be frank with the students when they ask. I hope to see you there. Ethan?
I apologize. My hand was still raised from last time.
Okay. Do you have another one?
Not at the moment, but thank you.
Sure. Ryan?
My final question here would be if you could speak on a little bit the importance of Bill 1715 and what it kind of stands for and where you hope similar legislation goes, and how the university can further support students in these groups.
Absolutely. I think what separates Bill 1715 from many of the UPUA's advocacy calls in the past is that it directly puts something into motion. Resolutions speak on behalf of the student body, policies change governing documents and our procedures, but bills use the student fee money, which all students pay through the activity fee and is distributed from the fee board, to then give back to the students and really give them the opportunity to see those tuition dollars be brought back into existence. So not only was the UPUA's assembly and the representatives who sponsored it calling for greater support, but they were actually putting their money where their mouth was. Literally, there's no better way to put it. In helping provide students the actual opportunity to get those vouchers and truly represent themselves with the name that they so choose. I think it's important that the UPUA continues in that advocacy the same way. We can't just keep, as we've historically done throughout our storied history, call for things without necessarily seeing a substantial ask or a sort of vagueness behind it. Supporting, I can remember something I was basically asked to do as chair of governmental affairs last year, was support a better relationship between the neighborhood associations and the UPUA. And the trouble that we had with it initially was that the idea of a resolution itself would have only focused on the need to build the relationship, but there being really little footwork to make it happen. And so we went out of our way to actually meet with some of the neighborhood association representatives, and I think we had dinner with one of the presidents. That was very nice. All this to say, you really have to put in the work too. It can't just be calls without any force behind it. Are there any other questions? Cool beans. Well, at a pretty timely 3:57, we'll wrap up today. I just want to thank again each of you for showing up today and to partaking in our first UPUA press conference. We'll host these pretty much weekly. They might differ from week to week depending on how we structure it, between a press briefing and a press conference, in which perhaps myself or other officials from the administration will come and actually take questions from you. There might be times in which our press secretary, Emily, will deliver briefs and we'll be there to answer questions on our behalf. But regardless the format, we're really excited to be helping set this precedent for a more accessible student government. And I really do hope to see you again. Thank you all so much, and best of luck on any midterms or classes that you're having some trouble with. Let me know if I can be of any help in any way.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Emily.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for having us. Have a nice night.
Sure thing. You too.